you grow from tragedies? I think that we always kind of intellectually believe that we do. And I guess we do grow in some way, but I guess the question is, do you grow up towards heaven or do you grow deeper down towards hell? Because whether or not you live in heaven or hell, it's largely going to depend on how it is that you handle yourself and your circumstances. When you're going through a difficult time, if you rise to that occasion, then if you do grow from it, and that's an example of growing up towards heaven, because you become better. And it doesn't mean that the tragedy is any less tragic. Tragedies are going to be tragic no matter what. But you can compound the tragedy by responding to it in really ugly ways so that we become worse people through it. And so it might be true that we grow from all tragedies, but I guess that's the question. Do we grow up towards heaven or do we grow our roots deeper towards hell? I don't know. Because again, whether or not you live in heaven or hell will have to do with how you answer that question. Meaning that when you get out on the other side of that tragedy, what kind of a person are you? How did it change you? Did it change you for the better? Did it change you for the worse? Hopefully at the very least it changed you, neutrally, but let's face it, that doesn't usually happen. Do you grow from tragedies? It's actually not an easy question. And I get concerned if there are certain questions that if I ask them and we answer them really quickly, it either means that we thought a lot about it, or it means that we've thought not at all really about it. And that's one of those questions. And I hope that we do grow from tragedy, but I don't know that we always do. I think that we always kind of intellectually believe that we do. And I guess we do grow in some way, but I guess the question is, do you grow up towards heaven or do you grow deeper down towards hell? Because whether or not you live in heaven or hell, it's largely going to depend on how it is that you handle yourself and your circumstances. So when you're going through a difficult time, if you rise to that occasion, then you do grow from it, and that's an example of growing up towards heaven, because you become better. And it doesn't mean that the tragedy is any less tragic. Tragedies are going to be tragic no matter what. But you can compound the tragedy. Like we were in baseball, for example, we have this. If you're playing on the infield and the ball gets hit to you, and you go to pick it up and you drop it. And a lot of times people will do is they'll panic, they'll pick it up, and they'll grab the ball, and then they'll just throw it to first base in a really big rush. And it'll be a bad throw, and it'll get past the first baseman, and then the person, rather than just getting to first base on an error, they'll actually now get to second base. And we call it compounding the error. You make one error by bobbling the ball, and you make another error by throwing it away. So now the runner now where he's standing on second base, but there's a base hit that run is going to score. And so sometimes in life it's better just you bobble the ball, you just eat it. And sometimes in life it's better for us to just, when we're experiencing some kind of a tragedy, to just, to eat it. But we can compound it by responding to it in really ugly ways so that we become worse people through it. And so it might be true that we grow from all tragedies, but I guess that's the question. Do we grow up towards heaven or do we grow our roots deeper towards hell? I don't know. Because again, whether or not you live in heaven or hell will have to do with how you answer that question. Meaning that when you get out on the other side of that tragedy, what kind of a person are you? How did it change you? Did it change you for the better? Did it change you for the worse? Hopefully at the very least it changed you, neutrally, but let's face it, that doesn't usually happen. First off, when we say tragedy, what do we mean by tragedy? Can you give me an example of a tragedy? Yeah.
Like your parents dying, or maybe one of your family members in the hospital about to die.
Yeah. And so losing a loved one could be an example of tragedy. And what makes tragedy so difficult sometimes is that tragedy can be mixed with evil. So like, for example, the rainstorms that we had here a couple of weeks ago, I know some people had their houses flooded. Geez, dude, that's tragic, Because what can you do about this? I mean, it's like, well, I suppose if we had a crystal ball, we could have told you, well, don't live there. Okay, it's never happened before, so you never could have seen it coming. You should have put up sandbags. Why? Because they said it was going to be so many inches of rain. They don't even know what that. Like when someone tells you, oh, there's going to be an inch of rain, maybe you sit there and go, wow, or maybe you sit there and go, that much rain? That's not a lot. I mean, do anybody know how they actually measure rain? Yeah. I have a lot of degrees and I read a lot. I could not tell you how it is that they measure rain. All I know is when I hear an inch of rain, I look for the reaction from everybody else. Wow, wow, whole inch of rain, huh? Yeah. I don't understand why it is that an inch of rain can flood your house, or an inch and a half of rain can flood your house, but I just read about 8 feet of snow someplace else, and then I go, oh, we finally got some snow. It was 8 feet. And that's a good thing. So to get 8 feet of snow is good. To get an inch and a half of rain means total destruction. So that's a tragedy that you probably just couldn't have avoided. But then, if you're like my mom, she had a heart attack. Was that a tragedy? It almost seems like an inevitability of life. A tragedy seems to be the outlier. It's like, well, Stephen, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think that your mom was going to live forever? Well, I did when I was 5. I had an inkling when I was 7 that something might be amiss. But by the time I got to 10, I've kind of been expecting it ever since then. And so I don't know that that was a tragedy so much as it was just an inevitability. Now, if my mom had died in a workplace shooting, an active shooter shows up and shoots and kills her, is that a tragedy? Or is that evil? Because now, that's something that could have been avoided. And now how it is that we respond to all 3 of those situations is going to be, it's going to be the thing that shapes us, or at least very much reveals our character. Why is it that 5-year-old me thought that my mom would live forever? Because I wasn't humble. There was no humility. There almost never is any humility in a 5-year-old. You ever talk to a 5-year-old and have an argument with them? Or have an argument with an 8-year-old? And they know they're right because they don't know what they don't know. Their worldview is so limited that anything that's outside their worldview, they just don't have the mental development yet to understand that they can be wrong about things. And even if they realize they're wrong, they'll stop, and then you can see their eyes dart to the left, which means they're accessing the part of their brain that controls imagination, trying to think of a way out of this, that somehow, some way you're wrong. It's inevitability. So there's no humility in an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And that's why we think our parents are going to live forever, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know that there's a natural way of life. We don't know that everybody dies. But then once we realize that as we get a little bit older, it isn't so much my mom having a heart attack that was so much. My mom having a heart attack wasn't so much a tragedy as it was an inevitability of life. It can be part of the tragic nature of life. In other words, overall life is tragic. But that one certain event, I don't know if we categorize it that way. Maybe we do. I don't know. I'm just thinking. But then that first one, when you have a flood, that wasn't an inevitability of life. Think about it. There are people who lived in National City. They were born here, they were raised here, they died here, and they never had a flood like that. So it wasn't inevitable. They had other things that happened. I don't know. I don't know if there's a firestorm. I like to imagine that in the 19th century there were all kinds of firestorms. I don't know why, but I think everything was always on fire in the early 20th century. Why? I don't know. Just because we have our things, they have to have had their things, right? So that specific thing wasn't inevitable, but the challenges were inevitable. But then that last thing, if someone is killed like in a seemingly random act of violence, of course nothing is really random. Everything, we can track it back. Nothing is random. Even numbers aren't random. But when someone dies in something that seems random, that's part of the tragedy of it, because it seems like it has no meaning. It seems like it has no purpose. And if we understand that things happen, and by the way, that's why we like to use the language, well, everything happens for a reason. Like my mom, she dies, people have said, everything happens for a reason, Stephen. I'm like, yeah, because she smoked and she was, she was in horrible shape because of her back. She couldn't exercise or anything like that. So she was in terrible shape, so she had a heart attack, the end. And then, but like, well, no, but it has to serve a larger purpose. No, that's a strange thing because everybody dies. So all of our deaths serve a larger purpose. I know our lives can, but I don't know. Our deaths perhaps can, but I don't know that they inevitably do, unless you die in a meaningful way. In fact, hopefully, I'd like to think that when I die, that it actually ends all of that, meaning that all of the meaning and all of the reason and all of the goodness of my life doesn't all of a sudden just hinge on that last moment. I'd like for it to be, oh crap, he's gone. We're going to lose all of that going forward. I'd like to think that, but then again, I'd also like to think that unicorns were real, and that we just didn't discover them. Right? I like to think that Bigfoot is out there. I like to think that Billy the Kid survived the shooting in Fort Sumner. I like to believe a lot of incredible and amazing things, but I don't know that necessarily makes them true. But that last thing about evil, when things happen, when bad things happen, again, we like to think of it as, everything happens for a reason. But you ever lose somebody and people tell you, oh, don't worry, they're looking down on you from heaven? That horrifies me. How long do you, think about the person who loves you the most in your life. If they were to die and then they were to look down on you from heaven, how long do you think it would take for them to get totally disgusted by you? If they saw everything that you do. I don't think my mom would have lasted a day or two if she was looking at me. I like to think she'd be like, I'll see you later, man. Hopefully differently. But that last part about there being evil in the world, that's the stuff that we know it's out there. I've told you before, there are serpents in the garden. We're going to encounter them. But when things seem random, when things seem like they have no purpose and there's no meaning, well then, that's when things become incredibly tragic. But there's also a humility there because we can recognize and realize, at least first off, everyone's going to die. No one's special in that. There's a bit of humility there. Tragedies are going to happen. Okay, but how do you respond to them? Are you going to respond to them in a way that you're actually proactive and you're the person who can step forward and take charge, be a leader, or at the very least not be a liability? I'm sure some of you know that person that when there's a funeral or when there's a tragedy in the family, that person who's like in the corner wailing and crying and making it all about them. It's usually an aunt. In my case, it was my sister. And then all of a sudden that person is a liability because they take away from our focus on the actual thing that we have to deal with. Hope at the very least, don't be that person. Hopefully, at least be the person who can follow the marching orders and say, okay, what are we doing? And then finally, hopefully, be the person who can actually step forward and with your shoulders back, your chin up, that you can actually face the tragedies of life willingly, recognizing that they're going to come. You couldn't avoid them; they're going to happen. But hopefully leaning on all of your experience, everything you've learned, hopefully relying mostly on your character. You have the character of somebody who can come forward and deal with those tragedies of life when everybody else around you is falling apart. That you could be the person who's able to stand up forthrightly with good character and actually battle those challenges of life. Because we say what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, but I hope that we can all say that absolutely, truly, with every bit of our heart, actually really, really know that what doesn't kill us does make us stronger and makes us better for ourselves, for the people around us, and for the people around us who we don't even know, the strangers. So that when a stranger's in need, you're just as willing to step up and help as when, a loved one. Those two things don't always have to compete. Obviously, if someone you love is in a fire and someone you don't know is in a fire, and you can only save one, of course you're going to save the one that you care most about. But those situations are very, very rare in life. Usually you can save more than just the one, if you have the right character. So, the gift of tragedy isn't destruction. Tragedies are going to come. But the gift of tragedy is humility. We recognize that they're going to come. And it gives us a solid place, a solid understanding of our place in life. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?